Hey guys, today we're going to go over chapter 12, sections 1 through 3, which basically just goes over paying for government. Taxes are one of the many important ways that the government collects money, and you and every other citizen should know how government collects and spends your money. Debt has gone up and it has been going up for decades. It's not necessarily a political party thing, but it could be. Remember from when we went over the political spectrum, Republicans do try to spend less and cut programs so they can save money, but not always. And Democrats tend to want to spend more, but at the same time, their rationale is to spend money to make it later. For instance, say they put more money into education, well then they think that their product, you, might be a better consumer, make more money, make better choices, and save money in the long run. So which side's correct? I don't know. Anyway, debt has gone up in our country. Prices have risen. Money's worth less. We'd call that inflation. The debt right now is the highest it's ever been in our history, which is almost 26 trillion. It's higher than any other country, but at the same time, to make you worry a little less, this statistic is a little misleading because we are almost 26 trillion in debt, but we also make a lot of money as a country. For example, our debt to GDP ratio is actually 123%. So that's basically like if you make 40 grand a year, that would be saying that you're 50 grand in debt. So we are in more debt than any other country, but we also make more than any other country. Our debt is something you should definitely be concerned with, but you shouldn't feel totally hopeless because our GDP is extremely impressive. That in comparison to other countries, it's not nearly as bad. For example, if I was $250 in debt, that might not be a big deal. But if Ava was $250 in debt, well, she's a 3-year-old, she doesn't work, that would be a big deal because how is she going to pay it off? It's going to carry interest. I could pay it off quickly. It might take her whole childhood. In regards to the political spectrum, I want us to get away with this idea of free handouts because Republicans and Democrats agree, but they don't know they agree. Liberals and conservatives agree, but they don't know that they agree. They both try to produce results by giving people money. For instance, Republicans are notorious for giving corporations bailouts, and the hope is to spark the economy, to provide jobs, provide money, to get something out of it in the long run. That's the same idea that Democrats try to push with giving other people money. It's to try to give you money as like the individual so that you can increase your chances at opportunities at a job, to get a house, to start your own business, and so on. It's the same concept, but we're at a time that these two hate each other, but a lot of times they do the same things. And I only bring that up because I think like these misconceptions and the name calling and all the divisiveness just makes us worse as a country, makes us more divided. It makes us more tribal and it lessens the chance of us working together. But this video is going to be pretty short and sweet. It's the last one I have for you. I don't even have a bell ringer for you. But what I want you to answer is, what did you like most about this class throughout the year? And what do you think was the most important thing that you learned in class all year? Please answer that in Google Forms, and I appreciate having you all as students. And for this last video, we're going to describe ways to pay for government and also identify government expenses and the priorities. The government is huge and our largest employer, right? The federal bureaucracy is gigantic. Today, it costs an enormous amount of money to run all of the government because we're doing this with all the executive agencies, departments, thousands and thousands of jobs at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. Even teachers like Mr. Guerrero. As some of you know that are paying attention to current events, we're spending an extreme amount of money during the COVID to try to make sure that our standard of living stays where it's at. Our government is huge. I mean, it has to take care of 329 million people. The population's growing and costs keep going up. The cost of living is going up. Some wages are going up and some are staying the same. And money is also worth a little less today as well. Like $1 today in 2020 is not what $1 in 1990 was. And it wasn't what $1 was in 1960. The government today provides more programs and services today than it ever has before. Now for our country, our government spends the most money taking care of the elderly, the disabled, the impoverished, and also on military spending. If you watch more Republican news, they're going to push that the government spends money on free handouts to people that abuse the system, but that's not true. And if you watch a more left-leaning Democratic news, you might think that the government spends a ton of money just on the military. But let's unpack it a bit. Now, when I've collected data, like for last year when I taught this class, the information's obviously different because we're going through a pandemic and all these numbers have changed a lot. But in, let's say, a normal year, our government would get something like $3.5 trillion to spend, but we would spend $4.4 trillion. That means in, let's say, a normal year, before things have gotten to where they are now, each year from like Bush to Obama to Trump, we would go into about $800 billion in debt. And you also have to remember, with these budgets and with taxes, with tariffs, for the most part, Congress is in control of this. And they're the ones that actually pass the laws and pass the budgets. Now, the president and his administration, they can root for Congress to do certain things. They can push for them to do certain things. But whether you hate or love our debt, it only partially has to do with Trump. It only partially has to do with Obama. It only partially has to do with Bush. And it more so has to do with Congress. But they shouldn't also share the full blame. With all these issues we talk about, it's always complicated, and there's always so many factors that are involved. Now, when we look at the largest budgeted items, the first one comes up, Medicare and Medicaid, which would be over $1 trillion. The next one is Social Security, over $1 trillion. And then defense and war, which would be almost $700 billion. So, once again, these are the items that we prioritize the most for our government. Again, taking care of the elderly, disabled, impoverished, and the military. In recent history, we have been going about $800 billion in debt year to year. And our U.S. has to borrow money to cover these costs. Now, you don't just get money without an interest rate. An interest rate means that, well, every year, every month, based on that money amount that you owe, it tacks on more money. So if you borrow $10 and it's a 10% interest rate a month, that means every month you tack on $1 to that $10. And all of this makes up our national debt, which is the total of our nation's debt. So I want to take a look at this pie chart. This looks at the federal spending, but it's kind of broad. The pie chart's figures aren't far off, though, if you're just looking at discretionary spending. For example, this underestimates the amount of spending going into health and energy. And it also ignores mandatory spending. About 60% of all federal spending is considered mandatory, and about 34% is considered discretionary. This is the percent of spending that includes discretionary spending and the mandatory spending. So this would be a different look at the spending versus that other graph. For example, the military share that includes spending on Homeland Security shrinks from 57% to 16%. The health share goes from 5% to 26% once you count Medicare and Medicaid. Social Security, a category not even on the other pie chart, goes from 0 to 25%. So this also ties into our last lesson on the political spectrum, on political bias, and on propaganda. You can see when we just look at these pie charts, whatever the news source you're going to see, whatever the bias of the person who's trying to present evidence to you, sometimes they might try to give you this disingenuous picture. So we always have to keep that in mind and always dig deep on what we're looking at. Now, although military isn't our biggest expense, it's still one of our top priorities. And there is an argument that we do spend the most. We spend more than the next several below us combined. Now, is that okay? Is that not okay? Does that keep our position as a world leader? Does that protect us? Does that make us less safe? Is that a good use of money? Is it bad? That's up for you guys to decide, and I'd love for you to answer it in Google Forms. And I'm going to fly through this, because I'm trying to keep it short and sweet. We pay for government several ways: through taxes, tariffs, fees, fines, and bonds. The tax system is set up based on the ability to pay. For example, you're not going to be taxed the same way that I might be taxed, and I might not be taxed the same way that Trump might be taxed. And Trump might not be taxed the same way Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, would be taxed. There are different tax brackets. So the ability to pay basically means that there's lower taxes for lower incomes and higher taxes for higher incomes. Now, the tax brackets always change. So, for example, we can look at a single filer. We start at a 10% tax when you make $0 to just over $9,000. And then a 12% tax when you make over $9,000 to $38,000, right? Now, because they're in brackets, that means that first, like $9,000 was not taxed 12%, but taxed 10%. And then that income after was taxed 12%, and so on. But again, these always change. What equal application means is that some items are taxed equally, such as local property tax, which is paid the same as long as the property is worth the same. And sales tax is another example, which is the same no matter what. It doesn't matter if I make a ton of money or a little bit of money, you have to pay the same sales tax. Scheduled payment, what that means is that employers actually send workers' taxes directly to the government on a regular schedule, like weekly, bi-weekly, and so on. So you don't actually have to pay the taxes in this giant lump sum at the end of the year because your boss has been doing it for you. And then at the end, when you file your taxes, maybe you pay more, maybe you get some money back. So when the taxes are taken out of your gun club check or your Knoebels check, that's due to this scheduled payment. The other ways in which we pay for government are tariffs, so a tax on foreign goods. Another way we pay for government are fees, and these are payments charged by the government for license, like a hunter's license, a marriage license, fishing license, and so on. Basically have to do with like registration for different things. The government can also raise money by fines. That has to do with breaking a law. Maybe you're speeding, you have another traffic violation, you're illegally parked, and so on. The last way the government is funded are bonds. If you remember from history or civics, we have war bonds. It's the same concept. Citizens, or sometimes even other countries, can buy debt essentially. You can look at it as buying debt, or you can look at it as providing a loan. It would be a loan from you that carries a low interest rate, and then later you can cash it in and get more money than what you loaned. Now, I did rush through this. I didn't want to give you too much for your last instructional video. You do have a few more things to do for our class. I hope you enjoyed it, but more so I hope you learned something from it and actually benefited from it. You're always welcome to talk politics or anything else during my office hours or at any time. Remember, in the summer, they have something called Summer Slide, and summers actually aren't good for you for a number of reasons. Make sure to keep your skills sharp. If you need to check in with me or other teachers during the summer, I'm sure that's no issue. You should continue to grow as a student and continue to grow as a citizen. And if you just stop doing everything and stop thinking about everything you just learned in school, you will lose that knowledge. So make sure you stay active during the summer or as much as you can. Make sure you're still learning over the summer. And if you do take that serious, you'll have the best results. So, review questions to be completed on Google Forms. Explain the different ways we pay for government. Last, describe what the government spends their money on. What are the top priorities? Now, thanks so much for watching, guys. If you want to learn more about this stuff, as always, reach out to me. I have more resources. You can check out the U.S. debt clock online, and it has our country. It actually has the world debt clock, and it has other countries as well, which is super interesting. So you can get a good comparison. It has different states in comparison. It even shows our workforce right now and also our unemployment, which is at a record high. Very interesting, and it gives you a lot of good things to look at and think about. You look at Medicare enrollees, you look at Medicaid enrollees, you can look at how many people actually get food stamps, and then you can determine what the costs are. And you can even see how many millionaires we have. This website also includes foreclosures, bankruptcies, those that live in poverty, and even those without insurance. We'll finish up our last activities, and thanks so much for everything all year, guys. If you need anything, just pop in my room at any time or contact me online. Thanks, guys. Bye.